Hello and welcome back to Freedom to Conquer Driving Anxiety. Today I'm here with Roy Smart. Roy is a U.S. Army transportation veteran with experience driving all-terrain vehicles on and off roads in the U.S., Europe, and Japan. Currently, Roy has accumulated more than 20 years of experience serving the people of New York State as a certified driving instructor with the focus on driving fear and anxiety. Welcome, Roy, to our podcast.
Thank you, Chris.
So tell me, when people come to you with a issue with anxiety or fear associated with driving, what is the most common cause of this ailment for them?
Well, they do come with specifics typically as opposed to general. And the specifics usually is highway or driving next to larger vehicles like trucks and buses and bridges. There's also a relationship between highway and driving on bridges. So if the person has a fear of highway or bridges, they will also have the other. In other words, highways and bridges go together, occupy the same state of mind.
And I grew up in New York, just to be totally transparent. So New York has a unique structure, and there are a lot of challenges with buses, trucks, delivery vehicles, bridges and tunnels that are very concentrated in this area. So
Yes.
these are really challenges for a lot of people. And tell us about what strategies do you use to help people? Let's start with driving on the road with trucks, because we haven't discussed this in this summit yet.
Well, driving the road with trucks, usually it's not an issue until the person gets to the highway, because what happens is they get to the state where they feel as though there's no escape between getting off the highway and being next to the vehicle that they're fearful of, which is the truck. As a result, they tend to overcompensate by driving too far, too fast, what is necessary for the road conditions or for their driving skill or ability. They're afraid to pass the truck sometimes, so they will not go ahead past the truck. They will stay behind no matter how long it takes. So they have two issues. One is the truck, and the situation also with the highway, and they're actually over-processing in other words, the stimulus for the truck, the fear is so heightened that they don't calm themselves down enough to be able to rationalize and think about the fact that the truck driver is a very good driver. The truck is not going to leave their lane. So long as they drive safely and follow the rules, the laws, everything typically works out just fine. But when the emotion comes into play, the rule of law doesn't seem to have as strong as an effect on that person.
Yeah, that's very important, that emotion part of it. And I know from my experience driving on the roads with trucks, it does kind of limit your stimulus when you're behind a truck, because now you can't see the road going ahead. And I know part of what I've learned during driving was that you want to plan ahead and see what's ahead on you on the road.
Yes.
And when you have a truck in front of you, or sometimes to the side of you, you can't see the whole visual.
Yes.
And that can cause some anxiety also, isn't it?
Yes, Chris, you're correct. That is a very good point, indeed. And what I teach my students, and I'm sure you're aware of this fact, is it even says so on the trucks and buses. If you cannot see my mirror, I cannot see you. Also, there is the rule that is established when taking driver education or taking private driving lessons. You always leave a couple of seconds between you and the vehicle ahead of you. By leaving a couple of seconds, you allow yourself enough room to see around them and be able to react in case they start to slow down before you expected it. But the point you're making, per se, is that visual perspective ahead, so you can see past that vehicle, so you can have an idea to anticipate when they might begin to stop or react, so you can react to them. And yes, there are rules for that, and the rule basically is the 2-second rule.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent advice. And it's really important. In the tri-state area of New York, we have, I don't even remember how many bridges there are. There are so many bridges.
I couldn't tell you because I really don't know the number.
I can't even think of the number. There's so many bridges. And these are issues that people struggle with. What do you think is the first cause of people having issues with driving over bridges?
Ah, it's hard to actually nail this topic down exactly because everyone have this uniqueness about how they express their anxiety. They have a desire to go because, for example, I lived on Long Island. I taught driving on Long Island for the most part. And being that Long Island is small and you want to go off the island to first place you're going to get to is the city and then New Jersey and beyond. They tend to compensate. I have some people, for example, who actually used alternate routes to avoid the highways or the bridges. But eventually, it's hard to say because, you know, what they do to compensate, they have somebody else do the work for them.
Yeah.
And they live their lives in such a way that everything has to be built around the inability to drive over that bridge. So they restrict themselves from enjoying certain things in life or being able to go to some invitation upstate, for example, or in a place farther that requires the use of a bridge. I have taken people over the bridges number of time. Doesn't matter if it was a tri-state bridge or the Throgs Neck Bridge or the Whitestone Bridge. And one person took over the bridge, went over just fine after my driving with them and calming them down, but they would not return.
Ow.
Yes, I had to drive the vehicle back over the bridge in the opposite direction.
Wow.
But I did commend them and I compliment them for having the courage to actually, go over the bridge the first time. And despite my gentle persuasions to get her to come back over the bridge, she insisted that she had achieved enough and she would not return over the bridge. And I'm talking about after about a good half an hour of time.
Wow.
Yes, I decided to drive the vehicle back over the bridge and we came back safely.
Yeah, well, that's important.
I had another situation. I was driving with a lady. She had taken lessons with about 5 of our instructors. And this happened after about 2 years of consecutively trying to drive on the highway. And I took her out, got her into the highway, but as we got onto the highway, she started going slower and slower and slower and slower, despite whatever I said to her. So it became a case where it was unsafe to continue at that rate of speed because people are going by us at 55, 60 miles per hour, and we're going close to 30 miles per hour. So I had to pull her off the highway in the shoulder, and we sat there for about 45 minutes. And I remind you that a lesson that we give is about 45 minutes. And we're sitting on the side of the highway in a dangerous situation. People are passing us by for 45 minutes. As a result, that driving lesson will last twice as long. Mm. But after a while, I spoke to her very interpersonally and rationalized things with her as to what her desires were and why she should trust me because I'm in the same vehicle as she is. And whatever she does will affect me. And as a result, it's not only about her, it's also about myself. And being that I'm calm and I trust her, she's to actually trust me. And if I don't react to her in a negative way or a way that it seems unfairful, then she's doing just great.
That's
we got
wonderful.
back on the highway. We got back on the highway. Yeah, she actually drove back on. We merged back on, and she drove 2 exits beyond where we would have gotten off and turned around and came back, and she was awesome after that.
See, that's the kind of interpersonal relationship that people need. And that's wonderful that you're able to provide that to people. And, you touched on something that was really interesting when we were talking about going over bridges,
Yes.
is that when people can't go over bridges, they limit their world. And maybe they have a family member
Yes.
or a friend who lives on the other side of that bridge.
They
and
often do.
they can't go there. So it's a theme of this whole summit is that creating the possibilities of opening your world and opening yourself to the possibilities of being able to go anywhere.
Yes, it's also closed themselves in. I have some people who has never left their village, and if they did, it wasn't when they were driving. So it's not just a fear of the highway, trucks, bridges. It's also a fear of being lost or getting lost, despite the fact that you have GPS. And they don't trust the use of the GPS because the GPS might reroute them from a place where they would want to go. In other words, what they're used to. So
Right.
if they used to driving on Smith Street and the GPS would reroute them to David Road, this is unacceptable. So as a result, they tend to not use GPS and they write instructions down, extremely detailed instructions as to how they want to achieve their travels.
That really limits them as far as where they're able to go. And then it also limits their life because now they become highly dependent upon other people to take the role as driver. And maybe that person isn't available. Maybe that person has other commitments.
You're correct. And this one, I usually meet these people. I meet them after an unfortunate incident where the husband has passed away, for example, and now they have to drive, which I've met many of these people. Occasionally, I meet somebody who actually resided in Manhattan and haven't been in Manhattan, for example. They returned to the suburb and now they really want to drive, but the fear they had prior to going to Manhattan is now remanifested itself and it's back again. And they want to have someone to help them to alleviate that fear.
Yeah, and metropolitan areas present unique challenges. I know people who are perfectly comfortable driving in other places, but when they get into Manhattan with the challenges of the buses, the bike messengers, now the bike rentals and the taxis,
Transition.
especially the taxis,
Yes.
they want nothing to do with it.
Because of all the mergers and they happen so quickly and the tightness of confined tight spaces that you have to maneuver within. But generally speaking, though, people who were discussing having driving anxieties for bridges, they will absolutely avoid driving Manhattan. It's unless you find somebody's totally recovered, they will not take on the task of driving Manhattan. And these people who do recover and go on to drive through Manhattan, I don't know how to say this to you. Most of the people I have anxieties are females. So the people I've encountered for the large extent, or I would say 90% female. And the males, very rarely, but when they do have anxieties, it's similar, but they overcome the anxiety at a higher rate, from what I can tell. And they do into the city.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that has to do with the people all have their own personality types. And certain people, they will take in information and they will take in negative signals more readily than positive ones. Like the example you were giving of the woman who drove over the bridge. She was able to do it, but all this negative input that she had was even more powerful than the positive that she had of being actually able to drive over the bridge.
Or listening to my input. And what's happening in those cases, like I think you have a good understanding of this, is there are two states of mind. And what happens is they're allowing their what is the description you give to the state of mind when you're sleeping again? That takes
that would be being in the subconscious when you're sleeping.
Yes. The subconscious is overriding their conscious sense of purpose. So what happens is subconscious, of course, is based on a lot of these is instincts, are based on instincts. And when your instincts are overriding or suppressing your desires, your rational thinking, then it's very difficult to actually respond to what somebody is offering to you, because it's so loud and you can't seem to escape from it because it's just pressing. It's like subconscious is usually down here, down below. With some people who have extreme anxiety, totally reversed. The subconscious is on top, and the conscious and the consciousness, typical for rationale, is down below, and the subconscious therefore dominates the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we say from the therapist point of view is that two things. One, subconscious runs patterns. So if we have patterns of negative behavior, or we have negative thought patterns, it's going to be manifested whenever we encounter stimuli. The other thing is that the subconscious mind is about 88% of our brain power.
Yes.
So we have about 12%, which is the rational conscious thinking part of the brain.
Yes.
Trying to fight the 88%.
Yes.
That's a big battle.
It is a very, very, I can see that being an extremely big battle. Yes. And I also noticed that these people who are struggling with the anxieties, a lot of the stimulus is not necessarily external, it's actually internal as well. So they're visually, I mean, most of these things that happen visually. They respond to what they overprocess visual stimuli. But sometimes the internal self is so, it's expressing itself so loudly that despite the visual stimuli, or even what you hear come from somebody else, it just does not allow that person to achieve what they're trying to achieve in the time frame that they're trying to achieve it.
Right. And one of the things we talked about earlier in this summit was fear versus phobia. Now, fear comes from an actual event. Something happened, like someone had a car accident, someone had a near miss, or someone they knew had a bad accident and they internalized that stimulus. Versus phobia, where it's all input that they have transmuted. They create situations that haven't happened and turn them into possibilities, and the possibilities become fear.
You are so correct about that. Yes, it's projecting ahead what is not realistic going to happen, but you think it will happen by just thinking about the event. You basically manufacture your own destiny or sense of doom. You feel it, even though it's not rational to feel it.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about people who have had accidents that come to you that now experience anxiety as a result of that accident. How do you help them?
I have had a number of people who been through accidents. It could be minor ones. I had, for example, somebody who knocked down the garage door twice.
Wow.
And they came back. I had somebody who was merging. The roads the lanes are usually straight, but sometimes they merge or they deviate from being straight. And somebody was going straight and they thought the lane was going straight. They crossed over and hit someone else. Came back for a refresher as to what happened. I had another person who was merging from a side street, kind of like the way you merge into the highway.
Right.
So therefore, you have to yield to people in this case, people on your left. But traffic was continuous and was flowing. And this person, according to what they explained to me, they knew they shouldn't have gone, but they panicked and they went, and that instant they got into the car crash. So what I've done with them is I don't take them exactly back to that location initially speaking. In other words, I don't want them to have a state of alarm where they suddenly blow up again. So I take them out, I observe their driving skills, how calm they are, whether they can drive, follow the rules. Is there anything different about their driving ability? I test their eyes. Can they see well? In other words, a 20/20 vision, It's extremely important. Some people don't know they have poor vision. It is a huge situation. I've had a young lady, for example, I was teaching driving in a driver education program at the high school, just to deviate for a second. And I could not figure out why she could not drive correctly, make the turns correct properly, change lanes properly. So I said, could you stop for a minute? Look at the car in front of you. I need for you to read the license plate. Even about 2 car lengths away, she could not read that license plate correctly. As a result, she cannot judge the turns correctly. She cannot anticipate when to begin to turn, when to recover, how far the cars are behind her or next to her when she's changing lanes. So she went to the doctor and came back. I told her, go to the doctor and get prescription. 2 weeks afterwards, she came back and she says, I asked her what happened. She said, the doctor says, have you been living in a fog? And how did she put it? Have you been living in the fog all of your life because you do not see correctly?
And then she got corrective lenses.
And the world opened up to her, and her driving improved tremendously because of the vision.
That's really important. What you're bringing out is 2 things. One, because you're talking about people who've had accidents and not bringing them back to the exact spot, but first letting them experience driving. So it brings them into a state of being present.
Yes.
And that's really important when it comes to driving and eliminating anxiety is being present in the moment and taking in the stimuli. And again, another example that you're bringing, if you can't visually see the stimuli, you become inefficient in being present.
Yes. And being present as well is going back into the car and realizing that although you feel as though this is a threat to you, it's a manageable threat. Driving is a risk. There's always risk in everything that we do, and driving is no different from that. But it is manageable, and the rules are your foundation for starting to manage that risk that you take. And by taking them back into the car, driving with them calmly, being calm myself, and having them being there and being in the moment, it allows them to settle down again, accept the reality of the situation. Once that has occurred, then you can take them back to where the incident occurred and explain to them. You have to explain. If you do not explain what happened, the confusion will still linger.
Yeah, that's true.
How to
Very true.
Yes. How to avoid what happened and what options you had available to you that you could have utilized.
And it's interesting because we associate, you said there is a risk, and that's very true. And we associate driving as potential risk. But the facts are, statistically, you're more likely to have an accident in your own home than you are driving. And you're in your own home more.
Yes.
And it's where you feel the safest.
Trust me, I've hurt my fingers, my toes, my knees more in my home than any time I've been in the car.
That's so, it is so true. And that's why I really think that bringing the perspective of someone who is an expert on this topic is so important to people to understand that, anybody can have this driving anxiety because they could be presented with stimuli that overwhelms them. They're in between trucks. They're in between buses.
Yes.
They're in a unfamiliar place driving. They're going over a bridge that they're not comfortable with. The traffic is moving much more rapidly than they're used to.
You've got them all. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And so I want you to talk a little bit about your book, Goodbye Driving Anxiety.
That book took me about 2 years to write. It wasn't my intention to write on the topic of goodbye driving anxiety or driving anxiety per se, but my students have encouraged me to actually put my ideas into writing many times. I've taught thousands of people how to drive and overcome their fears and anxieties. and in such a way that I started to specialize I asked my school I used to work for to, if you have people who have anxious feelings, you can send them my way. And so they've expressed that I should write a book. And I thought for a minute, well, why not? I'm going to do that. And as a result, I began by looking at accidents. In other words, what people are fearful of, what brings on their anxieties, and what induces that anxiety. And the beginning of the book begins where somebody is driving along, and of no fault of their own, something happens in front of them, and they become a part of that, and the consequences thereof, the physical consequences, the medical consequences, and of course, the mental consequences.
Yeah. And that is such a gift to the world that you were able to put together a multitude of experiences with multitude of students and your expertise, and be able to share your strategies and how you help people so that they can make the leap to being confident drivers.
Yes, and I noticed that people tend to, if you know somebody who's been through a situation that you are in and they have overcome that, and you see the methods and techniques in which they use to overcome it, it allows you to say, yes, okay, that person did it. As a result, I have a very good chance of overcoming mine as well. And I put those information in the book. I give exact examples of people who have, what they've been through and how they've achieved their goals and what they did to overcome their anxieties. Of all the people I've taught who are anxious, I believe I'm talking about thousands of people here, Chris. Only about 2 I've been unsuccessful with. 2 of them.
So you have a very good track record.
I would say their encouragement to tell me to write that book was they were on target, yes. And I have here behind me, because I just moved to this location recently, a lot of cards, gift cards, that I'm thankful that my students gave to me, and I've saved most of them. Many of them I've gotten rid of, but I've kept some because they were stacking up too much.
Well, that just shows and validates how valuable you are in this area of society. And I'm so glad that you were able to talk about this, and that it shows that it's possible to overcome this.
Despite your age, doesn't matter if you're 16 or 90 years old. I've gone through the entire range of people. There are also people out there, Chris, who are recovering from having had a stroke. I've had people, generally speaking, in the age of between 60 to 75, they're recovering from some kind of acute trauma. When you have a stroke, sometimes you forget a lot of things. You forget how to walk, how to talk, how to drive. And I've had to get those people back on course, and they're usually referred from a doctor, a physician. You see, after physical therapy.
That's amazing. If you can work with that segment of the population, that just shows how amazing an instructor this man is.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm amazing, but generally speaking, I get my feedback from the student. The person who is the best student is the one who wants to learn. I can have you in the car, Chris, and if you don't have the desire to want to learn, I cannot break through to you, and it takes you so much longer. But the person who really, I'll give you an example. I had a young lady in the car, and in the second driving lesson, she began to cry. And did I say something wrong? Have I done something wrong? So I asked her, what is someone doing wrong? She says, you haven't done anything wrong. You've done everything correct. You're the first person who've taught me the way you're teaching that I can understand and relate to.
Oh.
And she said, I wasn't crying because I was, angry or sad. I was so happy that you're helping me in such a way. And she overcome all her fears and passed the road test in 5 driving lessons.
Wow. That's a testimonial. And that's beautiful because it just shows you that it really just takes people connecting
Mhm.
and being able to put their fears aside and they can do anything.
Absolutely. I've also noticed this anxious feelings or the anxiety, it tends to manifest itself after about 1 year. In other words, if you've had it longer than a year, then it's difficult to actually get rid of it. The students who I've worked with, often have the anxieties up to age from 10, 20 years. I've had mothers and fathers of young men who were in their 30s and their 40s who've been anxious about driving because somebody yelled at them, an instructor, an inspector from the DMV yelled at them, told them that you're never going to drive. This is just not the way to do it. Or their parents were too aggressive towards them. A driving instructor used to grab the wheel or push the brakes too many times, and that traumatized them. And so they believe that driving is not for them.
Mm.
And they continued that progression of those feelings without exploring other methods until they met me sometimes for years, 10 years, 20 years. I've had somebody who did this. That lady went on the highway with me. I gave an example before. We pulled over on the highway and stopped. And then she drove 2 exits. She did that. She had that anxiety for about 20, relatively 20, 22 to 23 years. She lived with that.
Mm. Yeah, I've had similar experience with clients with someone that I worked with who was not able to drive on the highway for more than 10 years and only began to do it out of necessity. Now her children had to go and be places, and
Mhm.
there was no alternate routes. I mean,
Yes.
that's a strategy a lot of people use, especially like in a place in Long Island, where there's a lot of expressways, a lot of highways, but there's also side roads. And yeah, the side roads might take you
3 times as
double, yeah,
long.
3 times as long, but they will plan out those routes to become very expert at that. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden now, if you give them the right relief,
Yes.
being able to reframe their perspective and they get back on the highway, their life opens up.
You said it correctly. It's a matter of perspective. In other words, making a decision that this is what you want to do. Once you make a decision, you have that fear. You come for help, you want help, you open up to that help. You open your mind, you accept that the person that you're with can in fact help you. Now, that is the initial thought part. Now you must make the decision that, yes, I'm going to do this. Yes, I want to. And by doing so, you change your perspective by seeing things in a more positive way. This way, you don't hold on to that anxious feeling that what you project ahead of yourself that would happen is never going to manifest itself. And it hasn't.
Yeah, that is such valuable information. Roy, tell the people how they can get in touch with you.
Well, there are a lot of ways to get in touch with me. My name is Delroy Smart. However, you can find me by YouTubing, or you can actually search uh, RoyDrive, which is RoyDrive. I have a YouTube channel also called RoyDrive. I have a website called RoyDrive, RoyDrive.com. Also, if you go to Amazon, my books are available there. You can type in my name, Delroy Smart, or just type in Roy Drive or the name of my books. Well, in this case, referring to the book that we're discussing, Goodbye Driving Anxiety, can be found there as well. You can also email me. My email is available on my website. Basically, it's info@roydrive.com.
Roy, it's been wonderful talking with you, and you've shared so many valuable insights and understandings. And I hope that people will seek you out and watch his YouTube channel. He's got some very interesting videos on his YouTube. I know they will help people.
Yes, I hope so too. And some of my complimentary notes for my students are also there.
That's so awesome. Roy, it was great speaking with you. And we will continue on freedom to conquer driving anxiety.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for the invite. Hope we can do it again sometime.
Yes, thank you.